go. We did not have a closed session today. Today is Tuesday, October 21st, and all commissioners are present. Let's do a little public comments. Anybody?
We just have the one comment sent in by Matt Haskell.
All right. Is it something short we could read, or should we just share it?
It is an email that was sent to you in regard to the airport master plan update. Today's presentation. Mr. Paskus couldn't be here, but asked that it was entered into public comment.
All right, let's, it's a little lengthy. Let's make sure we all read it, but we'll just put this in the official record if we can. Anybody else? Anybody? 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 Looks like a pretty well-known crowd out here today. So let's move right to our consent agenda.
A motion to approve consent agenda items A through E.
All right, gentlemen, any discussion about any items there?
No.
Melvin?
No.
I haven't even opened my notebook yet. Well, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thanks, Dan.
Aye.
Let's start with some presentations. Thanks, John. Looks like you're up.
The agenda said no one told me otherwise.
Not yet.
I'm here to update you on the master plan. We've had some changes since the last time we talked, so we thought it'd be a good time to bring you up to date. We've got some official business going on with FAA, so I'll take the next couple of minutes and bring you up to date. The process that we've been going through, of course, is we're over halfway done. We've completed everything up to and including the identification and the selection of alternative development options. We vetted that with FAA, got their approvals, and we're moving forward and have in fact submitted the official document, the airport layout plan, to the FAA for their preliminary review and comment before we submit it for formal review and comment. So what that means is the preliminary review and comment takes them a week, formal review and comment takes up to 90 days. So we expect to have their preliminary review and comment by Friday. We'll make whatever adjustments and then we'll formally submit for their approval on this thing. We're doing the environmental checklist right now, the NEPA and SEPA. These are not environmental assessments or impact statements. They're a checklist that says of those recommendations in the plan, these will require environmental actions prior to implementation. We've completed the noise analysis. We've gotten preliminary FAA okay that it meets their standards. And then we're developing a phasing plan for the implementation phase of the master plan. What I'm going to present to you tonight includes both new and old information. And the new information has to do with some recommendations that we looked at that resulted from a review of a runway, what they call a local runway safety action team investigation that the FAA did at Bellingham, and what they found and what their recommendations were in terms of increasing and enhancing safety on the airport. The other was some final decisions on the RON positions, that's remain overnight positions for the commercial airplanes that are going to spend the night here. The disposition of the new snow removal equipment building that will be being built, and I wanted to present the results of our noise evaluation. Previously, we discussed such things as the air traffic control tower and the airport surveillance radar, new instrument landing system, the jet run-up areas, the helicopter landing areas, what the terminal expansion plans are, airport access plans in general aviation. And I'm going to, they're included in the presentation, but I'm going to go very quickly over that because all that's new to be said about those is they've been accepted by the FAA as the final decisions on that. So we looked at the parallel taxiway and the exit taxiways. We needed to reevaluate their alignment and their locations so that they could operate, so that aircraft could operate more efficiently on the runway. We needed to reduce the direct access from the apron to the taxiway, and we needed to eliminate a confusing taxiway interchange and correct some non-standard issues with taxiway alignments. And that's what I'm showing here. What we've got is, there's a couple of things. The first is We have direct access indicated by these red arrows that allowed a pilot to start out on the apron area, start their engines, and proceed directly out to the runway. And that's the source of a lot of runway incursions across the country. We had a taxiway interchange here that was non-standard and was causing confusion. And with the introduction of the 747-200 into the fleet, the original layout of this taxi lane here that accessed the apron area didn't meet the standards for that airplane. It was just slightly too narrow, so that we're going to be fixing and making recommendations to fix that. The slide you're seeing in front of you shows the realignment of the taxiway, the closure of some of these taxiways that allow direct access, as well as a couple of new taxiways that I'll get to on the next slide. But that's the terminal area apron improvements that come out, new and redesignation of use of pavements. We needed to look at the parallel taxiways and the access taxiways and to improve efficiency on the airport. As you can see, a lot of the current taxiways that come off and once I find, these are what I'm referring to as exit taxiways. They exit the runway onto the parallel taxiway. A lot of those are made up of what's called legacy pavement. It was pavement that was there, that was in good shape, and over the years it's been refurbished without rethinking. And what we have is a lot of, if you're landing on runway 16, when you're taking off on these taxiways, you're turning around. You have to slow down, and then you have to make a more than a 90-degree turn in order to get back to. And what that has been causing is some pushing of the pavement as the aircraft, if they're not slow enough and they're heavy aircraft, they'll push pavement in front of them, which causes the pavement on those sections of the runway to wear out faster. The FAA asked that we look at this. What we come up with is 4 new exit taxiways at 90-degree angles to replace the current 4 angled exit taxiways. And these have been spaced to accommodate all the GA aircraft on the first one, most of the business aircraft by the second taxi exit, all of the 737s by the third, and then the only thing that has to go the whole way to the end would be the 757-200. So that's what that is. The FAA requires that these be 90-degree exits because they want the aircraft to be slowed down enough to make the turn and get back to the RON locations. When we last spoke, we were talking about RONs, the remain overnight positions out on the apron across from the terminal parking positions. And when the FAA reviewed that, and this is a paraphrase, it's that putting them on the main apron just added to a confusing and congested situation. So we had to look at alternative locations for those. We examined the north side. We examined an area south of the terminal building, just down where the existing hangars are, and then we looked at the Air National Guard site. And when we looked at all those, the Air National Guard site was the best place for those based on the land availability, the cost considerations in terms of being able to put RON spaces in at the least amount of cost in an area that was acceptable to the FAA and wasn't adding to the congestion. And it has an overall positive contribution to the airport development plan. And so what we're talking about here is taking the area where the Air National Guard facility is, which was in here, and leveling that out and providing space initially for 6 remain overnight parking positions, 737s, A219, the Airbus aircraft, and then also a couple of the Q400s. And that allows the airlines to leave their aircraft here overnight and then taxi them back. It keeps them out of the FAR Part 77 surfaces. And that's the area between the Oakley hangar and the ARFF. The FAA also wanted to determine the best location for the snow removal equipment building. And we looked at two sites on that. One was, in addition to the slide you just saw that showed the RONs, that the snow removal equipment building would fit over there also. And the other potential site was to take this Army National Guard site on the other side of the road from the airport itself. We looked at these based on a number of factors, as accessibility to the runway, and if you put it down on the Army Guard site, the snow removal equipment has to go on a public roadway before it turns up and gets on the airport, and then it has to go through a gate, and there's a delay involved that. But probably the biggest reason for us deciding to replace one of the remain overnight positions with a snow removal equipment building is because the folks that work in the yard are the same people that are going to run the snow removal equipment building, and it was just it made a lot of sense to keep everybody in the same area and keep the trucks and stuff from having to run back and forth between the facilities. So our recommendation is to develop the snow removal equipment building site at the same time that the RON positions are put into the airport. And when I said earlier that this was a step in the ultimate development of the airport, ultimately these RON positions will be moved closer to the terminal building after one, if demand materializes, two, if the hangars down there are relocated, then these RONs would end up down in the terminal area so that it's closer to the terminal and they can be towed back and forth. And this area would be developed ultimately for general aviation, corporate hangars, replacement of the GA facility and the customs. The noise evaluation was the other thing that we've been working with the FAA to get approvals on. Talked last time we met about the 4 steps in getting to a noise mitigation plan. We're still up here at the development of the noise contours. FAA's looked at these noise contours, but they have not made a determination of significance. They've approved the noise contours. They've approved the results of the noise analysis that were done, the inputs, and the fact that the model ran properly, and they agree with the results of the model. What we're showing here is our base case 2011 when we first started to develop the master plan. This is modeled based on the activity that occurred here in the year 2011. We know that at that point traffic was increasing pretty rapidly, so we did a noise contour that showed if everything went as planned and the growth and activity occurred and the types of airplanes, this is what would likely be happening in 2016. This is proving to be about right in terms of the activity levels and the types of airplanes, so that you can see if you I've got a comparison chart up here in a minute we'll talk about, but this is quite a bit bigger than the 2011. But when we looked at 2031, even with activity increases, with the change in the aircraft fleet and getting the MD-80s out of the aircraft fleet and the continual improvement of the noise footprint of individual aircraft, that by 2031, that contour would shrink over what it is today. It would still be bigger than it was in 2011, but it would be smaller than it is today. And what that means, I mean, noise over land doesn't mean anything. Noise over houses and neighborhoods means everything. So we went out and we counted the number of houses that were impacted based on that 2011 contour, and there were 13 housing units in 2011 that would have been exposed to noise levels greater than a DNL 65 LDN. That number increased to 28 by 2016. That growth in activity by those airplanes caused a lot more homes to be included in that zone. By 2031, with the increases and the changes, that number will decrease to 19, but that's still 6 more than it was in 2011. The rest of this shows the zoning associated with the land that hasn't been developed. And I think the important part here would be a lot of this urban residential land, there's those 46 acres out there zoned for residential that if the county or whoever has the authority over those land doesn't change and tweak their zoning, the chance that more people will move into this area is very real there. So. These are the things we already talked about, the air traffic control tower and how we want to relocate it to the north, putting a jet engine run-up area and getting the jet engine runoffs off of the taxiway Alpha onto a place where they're not on the active airfield. We talked a little bit about this earlier today and about the need to make certain before this goes in that various studies be done to make sure that the noise that comes out of this doesn't affect more residents, but that'll all be part of the design process to make sure that it operates properly. Helicopter landing area, we've recommended 2 of those, one for the ICE facility and one to be placed somewhere in that general aviation area. And our other airfield projects, as we said, new instrument landing system, new ASR. Those projects will be determined by others. There's no alternative for the ILS, and the FAA will be determined on the ASR. On the alternate airport access routes, as we said before, they're going to be studied in coordination with other regional agencies, and we acknowledge that 2 possibilities exist and are prepared to look at it as they progress. Terminal expansion by 2028. Now, the ultimate terminal building, we talked about it before. When the demand materializes, there'll be a need to expand that, and we expect that around 2028. Terminal apron here says includes 7 new RONs. Those have been moved to the area, but ultimately that terminal apron should have positions for those 7 remain overnights, because if you remember, we want to change those to GA and repurpose that pavement and get the commercial activity in one place and the general aviation activity separated into another. Any development's going to require a little bit more pavement and some restriping on Taxi Lane Hotel, and to get full use of this requires relocation of the ATCT. And that's basically the layout we've shown before. And it requires these things. We talked about this before, just some general aviation relocation and relocation of the air traffic control tower. GA development includes everything required to both relocate the facilities that exist in the terminal area today, as well as a plan to for expanded general aviation to meet new demand and demand that's been experienced to date. This has to be carefully staged so that the property and the land platforms become developed when they're needed and are used properly, but because everything's in one place now, getting it all staged and phased out becomes a complicated puzzle, and that's one we're working on today. There's also a wetland mitigation program that has to be implemented before these can be finalized. And once again, the GA development requires the air traffic control tower to be relocated for that land to be used optimally. You've seen this before. What we've concentrated on is the demand, and the relocation fits in phases 1, 2, and 3 here. Phase 4, for which there's no permission to develop yet, is not currently shown as needed for general aviation development, but should be reserved for future general aviation development. When we develop these areas, this is one way they could look at, and this in square footage and the number of airplanes, this accommodates the relocation of all the GA facilities that are currently in the terminal area, as well as the growth set forth in the master plan, the growth for new facilities. The biggest thing it's going to require, besides development of land, is Williamson Way will have to be relocated, because we'll have to close it between about the Oakley hangar and where it turns down here on the Baker View. So in order to make that happen, we're recommending that it be relocated. And this is a pictorial view of the new Bellingham International Airport layout plan. This is what the FAA is reviewing. There's a lot of information that's necessary to have on this drawing. This is one of 11 drawings that are part of the Bellingham International Airport layout plan set. Once this is reviewed and approved and changes made, this will be the document that the port has to have signed in order to be officially completed with the master plan and in order to be officially prepared to begin the next phase of development or projects at the airport. And this is what we got left to do, gather feedback. We're going to go out and talk to people Thursday night, get additional feedback. We continue to have weekly conversations with the FAA to keep this project moving forward. We expect full approval of the airport layout plan package by January. Our NEPA and SEPA checklist reviews will be done in November. Our phasing plans will be done in December. So come about the 1st of February, we'll be seeking approval of the package and closure of the master plan.
There are 2 public comment times, is that correct? Between now and January 2015 when it's complete?
We'll be having a public meeting to present information, and then if I understand correctly, there'll have to be a public hearing as part of the final approval process.
So there'll be one more after these 2 that we have coming up?
There's just one.
Oh, there's just one coming up, okay. Back on the slide that you had on the increased homes in, let's see, now back farther yet.
Yeah, I know which one you're looking for.
40-some acres.
This one?
Yep.
Yes. Are these new homes that will be built in the
Oh,
area?
these are homes that exist.
They're all existing homes.
We went out and we counted,
I would hope so.
physically counted homes in the vicinity, laid the contours over, and had identified which were homes, which were outbuildings, and these are homes that exist today.
So there won't be any additional homes built in the area?
There could be that. We don't know that. There's none that we know of that are being built, but as I said down here on this UR3 land, there's 59 acres where people could build homes. They're not building them now, but they could. And if those 59 acres were built, that's a possibility of a few more homes. Although there's a restriction on the number of homes per acre in that land. It's still at least 10, 12 more homes that will knowingly go inside a contour that is deemed.
Thank you.
So, John, how will the planes get from where they are offloading at the terminal and down to the remain overnight, the new one? Will they be towed?
To this area? At the present time, I would presume they'd be the towed, Dan, do you think? Or, they could either be taxied down or towed.
Mm-hmm.
They'll need towing equipment to get them into position, but I don't know that operationally we know that, or do we?
Well, operationally, they would be towed into position. They'd have to be.
Will they drive down the taxiway on their own power then, and then pull in, and then somebody will hook up and drag them in place?
Yeah, that's correct.
Would there be run-ups and that sort of activity happening here?
Not on the ramp itself. The highest power run-up that you could do on a remote overnight parking space would be just an idle run.
Okay.
Anything above that requires you to go out to an area that we've designated.
Okay,
for
so
high
no new
powers.
noise impact from this then, other than just the fact that they're running?
That's correct.
Okay. And then the I&M for 2031, did you include the growth in GA? Because I know that GA growth is not expected to be really
Yes.
dramatic. What sort of numbers would you be looking at?
We looked at the numbers that were in the approved forecast. I think what we're looking at there is, and please if I get these numbers, I'm going to get them close, but I'm not going
Your
to get
memory's
them
better than
exact.
this, than mine, so. yeah.
Pardon?
Your memory on this was better than mine, so go ahead.
We projected a growth to about 90,000 annual operations. Of those, approximately 20,000 of those were commercial or cargo, and so the remainder are GA. And that's currently there, what, about 30,000 a year? The GA.
The GA is higher than
Let's see, my memory is not the best either. For 2013, I think we had 65,000 operations, and I think commercial comprised maybe 10 to 12,000 of those. 2014, I don't know what we're going to be at, but something close.
And we modeled all of those in here. They're all included in here. They do a lot of touch and go activity. And in fact, we've already heard that residents know that they come out here and they make a turn, but what happens when you do I&M contours is the big airplanes just overpower the little airplanes. And the contours tend to take the shape of the big airplanes.
So how do you make the connection between the expected number of operations and the number of hangars we may need in the future? Is that those, I mean, it would seem that one's connected to the other.
They are when we
Specifically,
look at that.
are we planning for enough, given 60,000 GA operations, are we planning for enough GA hangar space with this proposal?
Yeah, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
So the number of operations determines the number of hangars.
Well, no, the number of based aircraft determines the number of hangars. The way we determine the number of operations is we look at a couple of things, but one of the things we look at is the growth in based aircraft, is what the trends look like, what the population would do, and then we say in the future you're likely to have X number of airplanes, and then each of those airplanes is going to need a place to park, whether it's in a hangar or on the apron. And we run some mathematical computations on that and determine the square footage necessary for new airplanes. But then we look at those airplanes. They represent your based aircraft. Now, they're not the only ones operating, but we run those also through, how many operations is each of those going to have in a year, and that's a contribution to the overall general aviation activity. And when we look at the other side, which is the operations that are done by aircraft that aren't based here, they also need a place to park when they come in. So we also have to account for how many of those will be on the ground at any given time.
So right now, we have a significant, I'd like to see more GA operations in the smaller jets, the sort of those corporate jets. How are we accommodating that activity in the future, assuming there's some growth there?
That's part of the GA development plan. John,
Yeah, it is, but it doesn't give the number of corporate jets. And
You'd be guessing, I think, at that, but
Yeah,
somewhere we have to
and that's
come.
one I don't even know where to begin on the guess. I know what we did project was in the future, based aircraft numbers would increase, but there'd be more jet activity than there was likely to be single and multi-engine piston activity, because the manufacturers were manufacturing jets today, but not the smaller airplanes. And so the general aviation fleet was morphing, so to speak. It was changing into a more jet and more business-oriented fleet. The exact numbers, Commissioner, I'm sorry, I just don't recall them at the moment.
So as far as where they're going to park, how they're going to interface with the parking areas, how they're going to, cross from where they're going, where they want to go, and all that sort of stuff, how do they fit into is it just more?
No, they'd be fitting into these corporate hangars.
Okay. Well, these would be based aircraft. What about transients?
Transients, we have them parking on, up here there'd be an FBO facility, and we have some transient jet aircraft parking here, over here.
Okay.
So what we have now, if you look on the apron, you've got the large jets parked down near the GA hangar. or the GA terminal. And what we're assuming here is when they come in, the jet activity, corporate jet activity tends to go to the fixed base operator. And so where we put a fixed base operator and the GA terminal together on at least this layout, we've left some room for big corporate jets over here, and then you could park smaller corporate jets in this area.
Okay. Would the FBO, in this case, would they be sort of offering those amenities that pilots tend to like?
Yeah, they do.
Okay.
And they do that now.
Okay. That's all I got.
Dan, how close to capacity are we now in general aviation? Do we have a lot of empty hangars, both private or owned by the port?
For the port-owned hangars, we are full. We have 32 hangars, and they are full. We have no vacancies.
Is there a waiting list for those?
It's a very short waiting list. Over the last 2 years, we've dropped from 35 names on the list to about 5 right now, 5 today. As far as open hangars with the privately owned hangar associations, I think there's maybe 3 or 4 open hangars right now. Or
Thank
3
you.
or 4 vacancies.
35?
Anything
Wow.
further, Tim?
No, I was just listening what.
That's it?
Yeah.
Thank you. I was really surprised about the 59 acres, but that's good to know, about the possible development land. That's a number that I was looking forward to hearing, but I was surprised it was that big.
Yeah.
So, yeah, thank you. Is that it? Good? All right, thanks, guys, appreciate it. Tamara, looks like a financial report. I gotta remember to put my computer here, because I can't see. Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Commissioners, we've got the third quarter financials to talk about. And at this point, we have a pretty good idea of where we're going to end up by the end of the year. So when we talk about budget in a couple minutes, those numbers will make a little bit more sense after hearing third quarter. I always like to start off with the balance sheet, and more specifically, the net assets portion of it. That's if you take your assets, subtract out your liabilities, that's what's left over. 9 months ago, we started out at $220 million in that category, and the first 9 months of 2014, we ended up over that at $222 million. 6-quarter net asset trend, we like to see that trajectory moving up and out, and you can see the last quarter was a little bit flat. That's a function of our revenues and costs being less than what we expect, but still moving up. Looking at port-wide revenues and expenses, we ended the 9 months at almost $26 million in revenue. That's the entire port, including taxes, grants, all of that. Operating revenues were just over $18 million, and that's what we'll look at a little bit more in detail. Expenses, we ended up the first 9 months at just over $16 million. And the expenses overall were better than we budgeted. So you can see we had a pretty good net income the first 9 months. Looking at aviation first, the revenues came in at quite a bit lower than what we budgeted, about $400,000 lower. And expenses were a little bit over budget, about $230,000 over budget, leaving a net income less than expected and less than last year. We're projecting to end the year about $700,000 worse than what we budgeted. So we'll talk about that when we talk about budget. The marinas came in revenues right at budget. Expenses were about $250,000 under budget so far, leaving a favorable net income by the end of the year. And we're expecting to end the year about $200,000 better than budgeted. Marine terminals, revenues came in a little bit higher than budget, and we'll see that we make up for that in the 2015 budget. We account for that. Expenses were also well controlled and a bit under budget, again showing a favorable net income. in this division. And we expect the end of the year to end about $150,000 better than what we budgeted. Real estate revenues and expenses came in about $150,000 better than budget, with a favorable net income as well. And we expect to end the year a little above budget there as well. And that's mainly a function of well-controlled expenses.
So I'm doing quick math here.
Yep.
Is that zero?
Sorry.
Zero to budget at the end of the year? You're 700 on the airport. I got to about zero.
I got to 200.
We also have overhead. So
Oh, that's without overhead?
that's without overhead, yeah.
Just so I'm,
Sorry.
there were 700 under in the airport, 200, 150, and 150. That's 500 over.
I had 300 on real estate, 150 up in revenue and 150 down in expenses?
7, 5, 200 better? You're saying?
Same.
Yeah. Yep.
200 better is what I figured.
Yep.
No,
200.
200 worse.
worse.
Sorry, 200 worse
yeah, we're 200,000 shorter than what we budgeted for
in the operating divisions.
in operating.
Right.
So real estate's only going to finish 150 better than
That's what we're projecting. Yeah. Depends on what these last few months
And
look like.
and you're just guessing on the fourth quarter.
Yeah, right.
What was the final number on the airport being down?
700.
700.
I think 700.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you.
The other thing we like to look at is our debt to asset ratio. This is the degree the port's assets are funded by debt. And we don't need to look at this every quarter, I don't think. Just look at it again if and when we consider financing projects with bonds. But this should stay steady as we pay our bills and don't issue additional debt. The debt service coverage, however, we should look at every quarter. This is how the port can meet its debt service, how we can make our payments. So if our bond payments, they're not steady. So as they go up, we need to make sure that our cash flow goes up with it in order to stay within the 1.35 is our legal requirement. And we're at 2.0 right now. And historically, the port has liked to stay close to 2, but legal, we're at 1.35. So we are okay there.
Tamara, so that legal number, the closest we ever were was in 2011 at 1.4?
Right. Right.
Thank you.
So moving on to risk management activities, there were no major incidents in the first 9 months of 2014. We do have a couple of open claims for the port that are still ongoing. The first one, these are just outstanding issues, nothing new. The GE boat fire, we've still got debris removal, and we don't have a date for that yet. And then the AMHS passenger ramp. Repairs to the ramp have begun, and we've reached an agreement with the state of Alaska, our port insurance, and the port on cost sharing for those repairs, and they've started. We've got a couple of claims open against the port. Again, it's the same two issues, the GE boathouse fire, the wrongful death is still outstanding, and depositions of port employees are going to be taken next month. And then the AMHS passenger ramp, the personal injury lawsuit is pending still. Commission has asked that we give a report quarterly on the stormwater program. And samples were taken, results were under permit benchmark for third quarter, as well as training and record keeping are all in compliance. The last item is the safety report. This, I'm happy to report, was not taken on port property. A number of recordable injuries were 5. Recordable incident rate was 495, and lost workday rate was 1.98. Elizabeth reported to you a month ago on the safety committee, and there has not been any additional injuries since her report.
Jeez.
Do you recognize that?
Looks a little like where I work, but
Okay.
we get it done.
That's all that matters, right?
One project that is nearing completion is the Fairhaven boat launch re-siding. This is before it was re-sided. This is after nearing completion, and I understand it's going to be completed in the next couple of weeks. As you can see, that's port capital dollars at work. What questions do you have for me?
Anything, Jim? Not one?
Not one.
Mr. Robbins?
I guess, did Dan leave, Zink? Oh, there he is. Dan, is the 700,000, of course, that's where we missed the biggest number in our budget this year, or at least it looks like we're going to. Was most of that just the Allegiant flights to Hawaii, and just the one to Hawaii and the one to San Diego?
That contributed a large portion to it. However, there are other flights, the frequency of flights that diminished throughout the year as well. Frontier only flew 3 times to Denver, 3 times a week to Denver, where in years past they flew 7 days a week or 4 days a week in 2013. We lost the Allegiant Reno flight, and that's all I can think of right now. Long Beach. We lost the Long Beach service as well.
So we lost, all those didn't gain any at this point.
That's correct.
With United not using Seattle as a hub anymore, are we working to see if they would fly from Bellingham to East? I mean, I'm sure our people are working on that. But I just saw that Delta kind of moved in on United, and they've now no longer going to make Seattle their big hub.
We are continuing our marketing efforts to many different airlines. We are in search of an eastbound destination that will enhance our niche market. United, Delta, American, all the major network carriers would be a good fit to do an eastbound destination from Bellingham.
So
Thank you.
could we have sometime in the near future a conversation about how the slowdown, the employments are down a bit, how that, is it going to affect our repayment on the bond for the terminal expansion, and sort of when we might get into sort of a worst-case scenario situation? I don't know when, I know we're not there, but I'd like to have some conversation about that before we get too far down the road and might miss an opportunity. Mr. Pascal did some brief look at, or took a brief look at his.
Mike, before you leave that subject that you were just talking about, maybe I don't understand it, but it sounded like you talked about six runs that were no longer taking place. If we lost another 6, it would probably take us down to that 1.3, would it not?
Well, that's port-wide. So if other divisions pick up, we look at that ratio.
I see. That's probably right.
But it would,
6 legs make a huge difference.
yeah.
Yeah,
Which is-
the way we estimate one destination 7 days a week from an airline is it equates to about $500,000 in revenue. That's parking revenue, concession revenue.
Say that number again, please. I'm sorry.
So one destination served 7 days a week by an airline equates to about $500,000 in revenue to the port.
Wow. So if we hadn't lost those, we would have had a nice increase.
Yes, sir.
Of course, you can see how it spreads across the organization, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. But I mean,
So Matt brings up this issue of WestJet flying to Palm Springs, right? Southwest is looking at Canada. Can you address those at all? Is this happening? It's going to happen? What might be the possible ramifications for here?
I don't have any knowledge of those.
Okay. I'll try to chase it down. All right, thank you. I've been, but watching, I know WestJet's been making a lot of noise recently anyway, so, you know. That's it? All right, you guys done?
Well, if Southwest is, according to the second bullet there, to move into Canada, I would think in Abbotsford, I would think that would be something that would be possibility of connecting up with. I mean, being that, is there something there that has to do with border issues or?
Well, I know the Canadian government has been looking at cross-border traffic and passengers flying out of U.S. airports versus Canadian airports and the potential of lost revenue that creates. So I'm assuming this might be an effort for the Canadian airports to try and attract more passengers through Canadian airports to U.S. destinations.
The highest number of passengers not flying in now must be something to do with reduction of taxes up there, or what's? Any ideas?
Honestly, I don't have many ideas on that. I know that we've done some just real off-the-cuff analysis of the Canadian dollar versus the U.S. dollar and how that compares to the number of employments that we're seeing at Bellingham. And there seems to be a direct correlation, with the rise and fluctuation of the Canadian dollar versus the U.S. dollar. But that was just a real rough analysis to see if there's any validity to that.
Anything else? No? All right, thanks for that. Thank you, Tamara. Mike Stoner, got a little Harris Avenue Shipyard update?
No, sir.
Oh, Tamara, sorry.
Budget update?
I saw Tamara and I thought we're done. We're not done?
Just 10 more minutes.
Okay. Budget update. Sorry, Mike. Got you excited here. Well, if you're ready, go ahead. We'll just have Tamara relax a little bit. She's been talking, Go ahead, Tamara. Thank you.
So Commissioners, this is our detailed draft strategic budget discussion. So today we'll talk a little bit about details, not feedback if you've got any, and then incorporate any of your feedback into the document and have that document available to the public a week from Monday. That'll be available on our website as well as a hard copy at the front desk. And then our next meeting will have a public hearing, and depending on what comes out today, either we will or won't have a presentation. So starting off with aviation, I know we just had a good discussion about that. The operating revenues budgeted are 9% below what's budgeted for 2014, but I want to mention that that's 9% below what's budgeted, not 9% below what we're seeing in 2014. So we're budgeting next year to look pretty close to what we're seeing this year. So that's what that is, at about $8 million next year in revenues. Expenses, we're looking at increasing.
Excuse me, Tamara. You're looking at another 9%?
No.
You're looking at even with 2014.
Very close.
Which will be 9% down from, thank you
That's
very
right.
much. Just wanted to clarify that.
We're looking at expenses increasing 9%. Again, we're a little bit over budget this year. We're looking at about a 6% increase over actuals. And those expenses are coming in the form of utilities, supplies, just all of those items associated with operating a larger terminal. The largest capital projects for the aviation division in 2015 is the snow removal equipment facility at $2.5 million, and that's being funded by the FAA at 90%. Looking at the marinas, we generally look at revenues increasing about 4%, and they were right on budget for 2014, so we've budgeted an additional 4% for 2015. And then we're seeing expenses increase 5% as well. And we're seeing the maintenance, preventative maintenance, scheduled repairs, utilities, we're seeing that pressure across the board.
That's the increase is maintenance?
That's a lot of it. There are several increases, but we're seeing the major ones being in our maintenance of our facilities, preventative maintenance, janitorial, utilities, those kinds of expenses. The largest capital project we have scheduled in the marinas are electrical upgrades, and that's at $1 million over the next 2 years, 2015 and 2016. Marine terminals, we're seeing operating revenues about 4.5% above 2014 budget, but remember, they're performing a little better than budget, so it's about 4% above what we're projecting for 2014. Expenses are also increasing about 6.5%. That's not only the maintenance costs and janitorial and things, but there's also an additional marketing push there, so we've increased some marketing dollars. The largest capital project there is the shipping terminal main pier repairs at $685,000 next year. Real estate revenues, we're looking at an increase of about 2.7% at $6 million, and these increases are based on contractual leases, so those are pretty set. Expenses, we're seeing increase about 4.5% to $1.7 million. And again, I feel like a broken record, but it's the janitorial and maintenance to keep our facilities updated. And this is the largest capital project we have port-wide. It's the shipyard pier repair, and that's over $7.5 million over 3 years. Looking at overhead, again, this is executive administration, planning, and facilities divisions. We're looking at over a 5% decrease in costs there at $2.3 million. And these costs will be spread over those operating divisions. The reason for the decrease is a reorganization of staff as well as tightening our spending. And we don't have any large projects generally scheduled for these divisions. So tax revenues, this is the same slide as 2 weeks ago, estimated at $6.9 million for 2015. If assessed values follow recent history, we should see about this level for the same levy rate. And again, the uses of those tax dollars are the GO debt payments, environmental program, public programs, public capital, as well as the waterfront acquisition site.
Remind me what we assumed for assessed valuation growth for the county?
1.5%.
That seems right.
So that figure, .2861, has remained pretty flat, right, over the...
Yeah, it fluctuates because we can request a dollar amount, and then the Whatcom County lets us know what the assessed values are, and they do the math. So we have to sort of guess what those assessed values are going to do.
A little bit of wiggle room.
A little bit, yeah. So environmental and the waterfront site, we're looking at revenues increasing about 1%, and that's that tissue warehouse lease, the Stortcraft lease. Expenses are going down about 1.7%, and again, that's due to a little bit of reorganization. It's moving those costs around. The biggest project we have here is the deconstruction for $3 million. And then the environmental remediation plays a big part here. We have almost $32 million in cleanup with a recovery of 28.7, leaving a net cost to the port of around $3 million.
We have $31 million that will be spent on cleanup in 2015, is that correct?
That's budget. Mm-hmm. Looking at the other public divisions, These are the economic development, community connections, and infrastructure. So we're looking at a,
Commenting about the previous slide, would you go back to that?
sure.
Yeah, the 31.7. Couldn't. We mentioned today at a meeting with the partnership that there's going to be some things happening this coming year, and really looking forward to that, right, Mike?
That's right. We have a few pretty good-sized projects scheduled to move through design and in. Thanks, Elizabeth. That's right, Commissioner. We have a number of pretty good-sized projects that are moving through design and into construction next year. As always, it always depends on getting our federal and state permits. But it looks like we're optimistic right now that we're going to have a good amount of work.
Good.
Of that $31 million, how much of that is at the GP site?
There's quite a bit of it that includes the Whatcom Waterway and the GP site. So I would say the lion's share of it is devoted to sites within the Bellingham waterfront acquisition site.
Thank you.
Okay. So in our other public divisions, we're showing revenues increasing 12%. And this is due to an increased marketing effort in our meeting space program. We're looking at receiving about $350,000 there. Expenses increasing about 8%. And this is largely due to, we created 2 new programs that we budgeted for, the records management as well as public records requests budget. And those 2 combined are about $250,000 for 2015. Oh. And capital projects, we have a few bulkheads that we're going to spend about $1 million on next year. So looking at cash flows, this is the exact slide that I showed a couple weeks ago, but I just wanted to reiterate this. We're projected to start the year with almost $31 million in cash. We'll receive almost $73 million. That includes all those environmental grants and taxes and all of that. Uses of cash, that includes everything, all the cleanups, all the operating costs, capital, and end the year with just over $22 million in cash. But remember, we have to reserve about $10 million of that, leaving us with about $12 million in available cash for things outside the budget. So have you got any questions for me? Or
The last time I looked at this rough draft, I had a concern about the Horizon ship down there that was $1,000. A lot of people don't like what it looks like, but I kind of do it $1,000 a day or $300,000 a year. But I'm under the impression that's going to be going away partway through the year. How did we budget for that? Because that's a sizable amount.
we did not budget a change there.
So we assume that that will be there for the full year of 2015 in our budget?
I believe we budget for 9 months generally.
Okay, so for 9 months of
Yeah.
it.
And Commissioner, we don't have any direct information from the customer that the vessel is leaving. There's, as oftentimes in the waterfront, speculation. They've taken some fuel off of it, and they've used that on another vessel that's kind of a similar vintage, and they've taken some parts off of it that they can use on that other vessel. But when I talk to my counterpart at Horizon Lines, they're going to leave it there, and it's theirs, you know, as long as they want to have it there.
Oh, great. Do they have another one they want to store?
At least one.
Well, actually, that's been the discussion. If this one were ever to be scrapped, there are some older vessels in their fleet, and they like the service that they get in Bellingham, and we may end up with another Horizon vessel if the one that's currently there were to leave.
Welcome them aboard.
Yeah.
Quick question about marine terminals marketing. So I haven't dug through that part of the budget yet. What's that? Which part of marine terminals is getting more marketing money?
The emphasis would be on the shipping terminal and the log pond area, not so much, the slide that
Yeah, the
Tamara had
slide
up showed the cruise terminal.
yeah.
The emphasis would be on the shipping terminal.
Okay, and then the snow removal shed, that's expected to start next year? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, years ago, we had a snow removal equipment building that was deconstructed as part of Phase 2 of our parking lot expansion. And so we owed the FAA a replacement building, and they're calling for it. And so that's why in the master plan, you saw the alternative analysis for the location and the recommendation.
So they don't like the shed that we're using now?
We don't have a shed right now. We're actually storing our snow removal equipment inside some of the old Air National Guard buildings, and most of
They're
it
out of the
doesn't.
rain, that's a shed.
Most of it doesn't fit.
Can't see 'em.
So what, do you deconstruct half that building then, or just take the whole thing down? Is that part of the plan, the Air National Guard building? I'm assuming you're going to put the snow removal shed in its final location as per the plan,
Right.
behind the ARF station, right?
Yeah, the existing buildings at the Air National Guard site, they must be deconstructed, and then a new facility will be erected.
All right. Well,
They're requiring that, but they're also paying 90% of it, is that correct?
That's correct.
aren't they nice? You have to do this and we'll pay for it. Wow, that's tough. That's tough.
Well, it's better than sometimes where you have to do it and you have to
And
pay
you pay
for it.
for it, I know, right?
Somehow that, yeah.
Is that about it, Tamara?
It is. I just want
Okay.
to talk about I didn't hear any changes. So we'll compile the budget as is and have it available to the public on Monday. And then we'll have a public hearing on November 4th. And we'll ask the commission to approve the final budget on November 18th. And then we'll get it filed with the county on December 1st.
All right. So far, so good. Anything further, Mr. Jorgensen?
I'm sure you're going to enjoy having this behind you.
I am.
We're not looking forward to the next one?
I am.
Okay. Okay.
One of those was a lie that came out one side or the other.
I love the pessimism and the optimism all at once. Thanks, Tamara. Mike, there you go. Now you're ready.
Thank you, Commissioner. And if it's okay with you, I'd like to do it in a little bit different sequence here. I have two sites that I'm going to be providing updates to, and I'll do the INJ Waterway first, followed by the Harris Avenue Shipyard. And these are two of our Model Toxic Control Act sites that we manage in the Bellingham Bay area. We're working on both of them under agreed orders with the Department of Ecology. We're the lead project proponent under those agreed orders. And you've heard a lot about both of these sites. We wanted to give you this update because each of them is moving forward into the public in a different way, and so we wanted to make sure that you had the latest information on them. And they're both, interestingly, there's a lot of similar information between the two sites. Like I say, they're two of our big Bellingham Bay sites. And when we manage those sites, we manage them within the context of the Bellingham Bay Action Team. This is a group of 12 different federal, state, local, and tribal agencies that we coordinate our work with. And as we move through the Model Toxic Control Act process, what we try to do is find the best fit for these projects. The Department of Ecology, for example, has their MOTCA process, and they have a very predetermined process to go through to investigate and evaluate a range of alternatives for cleaning up sites. And so we follow that process. And in the end, we have to apply a disproportionate cost analysis to determine which one of the sites best meets the MOTCA requirements at the most affordable cost. Within the Bellingham Bay Action Group, there's a lot of resource agencies as well. So we spend a lot of our time looking at our ecosystem restoration plans with them. Each one of these sites has a certain component that is aimed at improving habitat functions within the context of each one of these sites. So cleanup and habitat restoration. And of course, the Port of Bellingham has some project objectives here too. So with each one of these sites, what we do is we look at our current land uses in the area. So we look at our tenant operations. We do the best that we can to update future projected land uses through land use planning. For example, the I&J Waterway site is within the waterfront district, and so the master plan that the commission approved along with the city last year is a guiding document. And then when we talk about the Harris Avenue Shipyard site, that's one place where we also refer to the comprehensive scheme of harbor improvements that the commission recently updated. So cleanup, habitat, and land use are all common features here. Oh, and you see different names on the front here. What I've done is I've taken excerpts at PowerPoint presentations that were made to that Bellingham Bay Action Team earlier this morning. And so in this case, Anchor QEA is the port's consultant that was helping make the presentation, and we listed Dan Berlin, the Anchor's project manager, myself, and then Lucy McInerney, who is Ecology's project manager on this particular site. So this is a top-down view of the I&J waterway, and you can see here that it is a working waterway with industrial activities. The main operations that we'll refer to here include the Bornstein seafood operation and the U.S. Coast Guard facility here within the channel. Those two operations really take up a lot of the capacity for waterfront activities and vessel traffic. We'll also refer to the head of the waterway here, which under that state or that master plan with the city is aimed at public access. This is a site schematic that shows some of the features that we have to keep in mind when we're working on a site like this. The key one here that I want to point out is the federal navigation channel. When we are moving a site forward that has a federal navigation channel, Ecology typically assumes that we will dredge all the contamination out of that channel so that it can be used sort of in normal routine maintenance after the cleanup. But because of the Coast Guard facility that was built right in the channel, you can see it here in the schematic, our ability to get to a clean bottom at the authorized depth is compromised. And some of the agencies at the Bellingham Bay Action Team meeting basically have to step back. The state agencies have to step back when the federal government wants to do something. The federal government uses something called navigational servitude, which is sort of a trump card to go in and place a federal facility in a federal channel. They go through the required permitting, but they get their way most of the time. So we also look at historical activities. This has been a busy part of the waterfront for over 100 years. It included lumber mills, for example. The Olivine Corporation had a operation at the head of the waterway that crushed olivine ore to make fire brick, and that the olivine ore was quite high in nickel, which then shows up as a contaminant of concern in the waterway. Bornstein Seafoods has been there for a long time too. They're a very old tenant that we really help support their operation there. They have done certain activities here that are associated with some of the contamination we see as well. So we've been working with Bornstein very collaboratively under a cost share agreement, and we're moving forward trying to make sure that all of the liable parties have an appropriate cost share here. So right now, today, we have some of those same operations. We have Bornstein Seafood Operation. We have the Coast Guard Station. We have the boat haul out here at the head of the waterway. They're really not associated with the cleanup at all, but I wanted to mention those as just one of the activities in the same area. And then we have a number of vacant properties here. So we're looking at this piece of property here for future marine trades. And then we're also looking at this property at the head of the waterway as an opportunity for public access. Taking a closer look at the Bornstein operation, as I mentioned, they've been here for a long time. So one of the things we do in this kind of a site is take a look at the infrastructure in the area. In this case, it's both a dock and a bulkhead. They were both about the same vintage. They're well over 50 years old, and they are at this point, despite some modest repairs, they're in a state of relative disrepair. They're also built of creosote timbers, and in a site like this, ecology sediment management standards have identified polyaromatic hydrocarbons, PAHs, as a contaminant of concern, and creosote timbers are a source of those PAHs. So when the port starts to look at this site and come up with a best fit solution, we look at this old dock and we have to make a hard decision about whether or not it makes sense to repair that facility or just take it down and replace it. Similarly with the bulkhead's been around. It's served its purpose for quite some time, but it's in need of either significant repair or replacement. And we've taken a hard look at both of those options. And in this circumstance, you can see where the sediment occurs at the bottom of the bulkhead at low tide. The ability to meet ecology's requirement for the most permanent remedy is very compromised by this bulkhead. Basically, we can't do the dredging in front of the bulkhead without destabilizing the dock and the bulkhead. And so we've worked with the various different stakeholders here, including ecology, and they have agreed that because it's their preference to get to a more full removal, they are willing to identify both the bulkhead and the dock as components of the MOTCA remedy. So they under the proposal, they will be taken out and replaced with new modern materials.
Mike, just a quick question. And looking at that bulkhead and the pilings, 50 plus, right, in years?
Yes.
Has there ever been a major breakdown there of any kind that you're aware of? I'm just curious.
There hasn't been a major failure, no. There have been a number of situations, for example, where you see a whaler that's, that's broken, or a timber or a piling that's been broken, and those have tended to be repaired over time. But at this point, it's way beyond the design life of the facility. And again, in order to get to a full cleanup in the waterway, the dredging can't occur the way ecology wants it to with the pilings in these conditions. So the other thing we look at, I mentioned at the head of the waterway, because of some of these reasons of limited use at the head of the waterway, mostly determined by the presence of the Coast Guard station, under the planning work that we did with the city of Bellingham, we identified the head of the INJ as a good opportunity for a waterfront park and additional habitat restoration. And this is a picture of a project that we recently completed down in Squalicum Harbor, and it's this is a little bit older picture. It's really greened up right now, and it's functioning as designed. And this is the kind of habitat restoration that we expect to perform at the head of the INJ waterway as well. It's very much appreciated by the resource agencies. This one's kind of off limits to the public, and so it has habitat benefit because of that as well. For the one in the INJ waterway, we'll design it so that it does three things. It supports the cleanup effort. It supports habitat restoration, and it's done in such a way that it invites people down to enjoy that new beach, more similar maybe to a marine park. So when we take a look at this approach to sites, what we end up doing is dividing the site up into smaller site units, and with each one we apply this this approach of trying to find a best fit with the cleanup, habitat, and tenant operations. We've got about 6 alternatives here. I won't walk you through all of them, but this is the one that has risen to the top of the list as the preferred. And so what it does is it gets full removal here where we need navigation depth in front of Bornstein Seafoods. It basically relies on natural recovery in this portion of the waterway where we have the Coast Guard station that doesn't allow us to really get to the fully authorized depth. And then at the head of the waterway, we are installing a 3-foot cap that will function both for habitat and also beach play. So that's the preferred alternative. It's coming in at a cost of about $12.6 million. And the range of alternatives goes from about $5.4 million to $20.6 million. But this is the one that really best meets all of the objectives of both the port, ecology, and the other agencies at the table. So there's a well, just to get to this, there's a fact sheet that will be published here soon by Ecology. Ecology has the lead when they take us through these public comment periods on these sites. So there will be a draft remedial investigation and feasibility study that will be available for public review starting on October 30th. So that's coming right up, and wanted the commission to be aware of that. We'll get you copies of the fact sheet, and of course the RIFS documents are available too. Once we go through that process and make sure that we've got this right or adjust it pending whatever comments come in, we'll develop a draft cleanup action plan, that's Ecology's decision document, and sign up to a consent decree to move forward into design and cleanup on the site. And along the way, for these kind of projects in waterway, we're engaged in very close coordination with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to make sure that we have a permitting approach that's going to work here. So that's the plan moving forward, and stay tuned. We wanted you to make sure you had this information as it goes out to public, so if you get questions, it's familiar to you. Any questions at this point?
Mike, the pesky little numbers, but the $12 million, where's it coming from?
Good question, Commissioner. One of our biggest challenges on all these sites is to come up with a funding approach. And the Department of Ecology has been very supportive of our work on all these sites. They have made a commitment to help us with about 50% grant dollars. Of course, their commitment depends on the legislature giving them the funding to back up that commitment. So right now we're significantly under budget for Ecology's grant, but this has another year or two to go through too, so we hope to make up that deficit that we have right now. And then the other parties that pay are the potentially liable parties. So we are engaged with 2 of our tenants, Bornstein and the prior tenant, Olivine, and they have made claims against their pre-1986 insurance policies to help fund their share of things. And then the port also has a share of this as well. So we'll be using a combination of the port's environmental reserve and the funding that we devote to infrastructure updates as well. So we don't have a specific spreadsheet ready for you at this point, but I'm confident at this point that we'll be able to come up with a budget and funding plan to meet that $12.6 million.
None of the money will be MODCA money?
Yes, about half of it will be state grants, MODCA money.
The ecology money?
Right.
Okay.
Hey, Mike, crazy question. I've asked a similar question before. The pier, The pier, we replaced the pier. It's got issues, even as a pier. Stormwater management on there is probably a problem. You spill something, it falls off the side. Why don't we just sheet pile around it and fill it in?
We've looked at a lot of different options, including one like that, and there's enormous expense to that. There's also the challenge of having to mitigate for the fill of waters of the state. So that's one that would likely be higher than any of the alternatives we have here. Whereas rebuilding the dock in its current footprint for its current use, using modern materials, steel and concrete piles and decking, looks like a much more cost-efficient way to get to the operational needs that Bornstein has for the dock.
It'd be kind of cool to fill in that gap between the existing structure and the shoreline, solve a lot of future problems as well. But
It'd be great. It would be a good idea from an operational point of view, but from the resource agency's point of view, they love that gap. They love the the habitat functions that are supported by that gap between the dock and the bulkhead. So one of the things we're trying to do here is develop a project, like I said, that meets a lot of different operational goals.
one final question. What's expected depth after you're done next in the berthing unit next to the pier?
The authorized depth for this federal channel is 18 feet below mean low water. And so what we'll end up doing is taking it down to 18 feet plus 2 or 3 feet of overdredge for both the federal channel and the berthing area for Bornstein.
It'll be 18 at the berthing unit as well?
Right.
Okay. Jim, nothing?
That was my question on depth.
All right. Anything further? Okay. Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it.
Okay. So with that behind us, then we'll jump into the other site, which is the Harris Avenue Shipyard site. Now, this is another Bellingham-based site. It's got a lot of common features to the INJ. It's a good part of the working waterfront here. It's got old, dilapidated structures that need upgrading if we are to perform the cleanup the way Department of Ecology wants to. We also submitted a draft RIFS to the Department of Ecology in June for them to take a look at. As they were taking a look at it, the port was also having a number of different discussions with our tenants down there. We performed condition surveys on some of the old structures, and in some of these similar project management team working sessions, we determined that it looked like just doing a repair to those facilities and capping underneath those existing facilities was in a way putting good money after bad. You know, it was a lot of money that didn't really extend the lifetime of the project very far, and it didn't really meet Ecology's preference for a full removal. So the port at this point now is proposing to do a more robust cleanup at this site, but to do that, we need to take down some of those old dilapidated structures and plan on rebuilding them. So. And the condition survey that we had said that we should get on that in a relative hurry. We don't want to wait a couple of years to go through Ecology's process. So what we propose to Ecology is to carve that part of the work out and do it as an interim action under an agreed order starting next July and August, rather than waiting to go through the full ecology process to get a cleanup action plan, consent decree, remedial design, and then start the work likely 2 years later. So this is a site that's based on the same concept as the previous one, but it's got a little bit different path forward. So this is the Harris Avenue Shipyard site, and it includes, this is the Aeroac building, this is the Bellingham Cruise Terminal. Those are not parts of the site. The site basically follows this lineup around the Faithful Servant, back down here around the existing dry dock and some of these upland parcels. So under the site-wide approach, we would be addressing the entire upland and in-water site. As I mentioned, we gave the draft RIFS to Ecology in June of this year. We've been working with Ecology to revise that draft RIFS, and we are proposing an interim action to do a significant cleanup under an agreed order rather than a consent decree. I'll mention some of the contaminants of concerns here, COCs. And again, these are excerpts from a presentation PowerPoint that was developed by Floyd Snyder, which is our consultant on this site. And the presentation was made to the Bellingham Bay Action Team this morning. So the contaminants of concerns are typical boatyard metals, arsenic, zinc, copper, polychlorinated biphenyls, PAHs, and total petroleum hydrocarbons. This is very typical of shipyard operations throughout Puget Sound. So there's a lot of experience figuring out how to address those contaminants. The preferred alternative that we're teeing up to Ecology is kind of similar to the INJ. We're going to be removing some of the failing creosote infrastructure. We're going to dredge to clean surface where we can. We're going to excavate a total petroleum hydrocarbon hotspot that was in the footprint of a former above ground storage tank that was there during the old Pacific American Fisheries Day. So PAF owned and operated the site 100 years ago. The port bought it from PAF in 1966 and has been operating or leasing it to tenants since then. But there's an old above-ground storage tank, AST, that has been identified as a source of contamination in ground associated with those old PAF operations. And then we'll do some limited capping in sediment and upland soils. And then we will replace the main pier that we're taking out with a new concrete pier that meets modern standards. We will also be taking out the large structure called the Carpenter's Building, but we will not be replacing that Carpenter's Building. Just another look at site conditions. When you see underwater structures with important cross bracing that is gone, and timber pilings that are, largely compromised, and pile caps that, that hold up the decking above the piers that are gone, it's time to do some work. So the proposed interim action here would take place starting next August, and it's an interim action in that it is only in a portion of the site. So we'd be taking out the old dilapidated wooden pier. We'd be taking out the Carpenter's Building. We'd be doing the cleanup within this footprint, sediment removal. We'd be doing some upland soils work, including this hotspot around the previous above-ground storage tank. We'd be doing some excavation and restoration of shoreline here for habitat functions. And then one of the interesting ones here, there's a catwalk out here that is in place to support operations of the Marine Railway. We need to take out that catwalk, in part because it's built of old failing creosote timbers, but we also need to take it out so that we can access this portion of the site with the big heavy equipment and barges that you need to do that kind of work. And then once that work is done, we'll replace that catwalk with new modern materials. But this, the Carpenter's Building that is in this footprint will not be replaced. Instead, those tenant operations will be moved to an upland location. So that allows us to really reduce the net overwater coverage of this site, which the resource agencies really appreciate. It also reduces our long-term overwater maintenance costs as well. So next steps here are a little different than the last
Mike,
one.
can you go back
Yeah,
to
sure.
that last picture for a minute? Out there, sediment unit 5, that's all new pier out there, is that correct, or fairly new?
Right.
What's the just curious, what's the history behind the fact that we have a dilapidated pier, but out on the end of it, we have a new one? How'd that happen?
Yeah, that's a good question. And maybe Fred can chime in here if we want. But basically, when we were looking at that, the tenant at that time, which was Maritime Contractors Incorporated, thought they had a line on some really big repair jobs. It's designed to meet NATO specs. And that portion of the pier needed immediate replacement to meet those specs, whereas at that time, the inner portion of the pier was in pretty good shape. And so again, working to a limited budget, trying to do something that the tenant at that time could pay for in their lease, we had a limited upgrade. We've always looked at that intersection of the pier as something that we were going to need to do at some point in time, and it's been on our radar for the last few years, but it's looking like now's the time to do it.
How long ago was that, the end of that pier replaced? Do you remember?
It's in the 80s.
96.
Oh, okay.
96.
Okay. Thank you.
So the next steps here, as I mentioned, are a little bit different than in the I&J site. In this circumstance, the reason why we wanted to give you this update today is that our project team is preparing a JARPA, Joint Aquatic Resource Permit application for just phase 1 of the work, and they're planning on it basically hitting the streets to the permitting agencies. We're hoping by next week, but by the end of the month at least. And so the resource agencies will be looking at that technical document, which says that it is a proposed action that depends on approval by the Department of Ecology under MOTCA. So the Department of Ecology can't approve that under MOTCA until they go through their process, which is the second bullet. We'll be putting out a draft amendment to the agreed order, a draft interim action work plan, and a draft RIFS to the public in March or April of next year. And then we hope to get approval by ecology and approval by the Corps to perform the work in the spring, which will allow us to put the project bid documents out on the street and start the interim action work in August 2015. It's a big, complicated project. It'll probably take the entire fish window from August to February to do all the in-water work, but then we'll have some wrap-up work that will continue probably into July of 2016.
And you were saying you'd have to go through a lot more technical Department of Ecology, whatever they call them, regulations, if you waited, correct?
Oh, right, yes. Yes, so Commissioner Jorgensen, our best path forward to get the RIFS out to public is March and April. But then what ecology has to do is go through, develop, talk to people, get comments, respond to comments, finalize the RIFS, and then develop a draft cleanup action plan to put on the street for another round of public comment and the consent decree as well. And then to get the consent decree finalized probably would take us into the fall. And then to start remedial design would take another several months. So ecology right now is expressing support for taking this approach, basically putting the cleanup action plan and consent decree on hold until we can really tackle this as an interim action under an agreed order.
Thank you.
Mike, is there ever a period of time when we're not allowed to work on this project for fish habitat or any other reason?
Yes, it's typically between February 15th and July or August, depending on depending on what the fish are doing. But so it's a number of months, 6 months at least, where you can't do any in-water work. So that's another reason why if we want to do the work starting the next fish window in August 2015, we needed to make an adjustment in the path forward to this interim action approach.
So if it gets delayed, it would be probably delayed for a whole nother year.
Yes, that tends to happen. Either you make your deadline or you bounce to the next
In
year.
this case, it's August 15th through February.
Approximately, yes. Yeah, so we're on board to try to do this. We had a good meeting with the with all the regulatory agencies this morning. They're supportive of it. They, of course, can't say they approve of it until, they see the JARPA, they see the, final review of the RIFS and that sort of thing. But we're on a trajectory to try to pull this off for next August.
Thank you. A couple of quick questions, Mike. So the catwalk's got to come out. We put a new one in. I asked about this before. Have we had any more discussion about the location of that and if there's a better location? Has that gone anywhere yet?
Yeah, that's something that our design team is working on in close coordination with our tenants. So it will be put in a slightly different location for a number of different reasons.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then the Carpenter Building is coming out, and that could free up some access. Is there any discussion about depth there and providing maybe more access for other types of vessels to tie up on the new side of the pier?
What we're not dredging beyond what we need to dredge for cleanup purposes, which is just 2 or 3 feet. And so the project will give us, some more room to work, just side to side in that area, but it won't really give us appreciable more depth in that area.
Anything further? Anybody? Dan? Jim? Nothing? All right, thanks, Mike.
All right, thank you, Commissioners.
Looks like we have a few items to do something about. So legislative objectives, Mr. Hogan. Diane?
A motion to approve the draft 2015 legislative objectives shared between the Port of Bellingham, City of Bellingham, and Whatcom County.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Today I'm here to discuss the draft shared legislative agenda between the city, the port, and Whatcom County. This was an approach that we started in 2013 under an interlocal agreement with both the city and the county. And the intention was to highlight county-wide issues that were of shared interest to all 3 entities, and then also to cooperatively hire a government affairs representative to represent us down in Olympia and help us move forward with that agenda. As we move through the agenda, you'll see there are general categories, and that was intentional. As we move forward into the legislative session, the intention is that these categories will give us some flexibilities as different bills are introduced or modified so that we're not tied to specifics. This year, we did work with the city and the county to develop this, and we added a goal statement which emphasized that cooperative approach. This is fairly unique, and we wanted to draw attention to it. Given the divisiveness you see down in Olympia, speaking with a unified voice is a good thing. And then also emphasizing that the port, city, and county need the full resources to implement the goals and policies of the state. So the model toxics control account, this is our #1 priority and will be for quite a while. I think Mr. Stoner just emphasized a couple of the projects that we're working on. We're committed to a lot of environmental cleanup work, both in the waterfront district, up in Blaine and other places. And we really need the ecology MOTCA funding to complete those cleanups. And there's a huge economic benefit that we get from doing the cleanups, all the employment. There's a major benefit to redeveloping the property after we're done, bringing in new revitalized land uses. And this was an account that was approved under a voter initiative, specifically a tax on the import of hazardous waste oil to fund cleanups. And so that's a message that we want to give to the legislators over and over and over so that those funds aren't swept for different uses. The second category, infrastructure funding options, this relates to a comprehensive statewide transportation plan, also wastewater, stormwater, those types of infrastructure that's really key to activating areas like the waterfront district and different developments throughout the county. The third category, community and economic development initiatives. This has obviously a lot of different potential uses relevant to the port. A couple of them are the CURB, Community Economic Revitalization Board, which provides low-interest financing for infrastructure projects. So, for example, the LIFT funding for the waterfront district came through the CURB. There's also research and development, tax incentives, and then the marine tourism legislation is another one that we've pursued in past years and will continue to pursue. One update on the marine tourism legislation, and this deals with a tax that's imposed on certain vessels after 180 days that they stay in Washington. The governor this year commissioned a Parks and Outdoor Recreation Task Force to look at ways to leverage parks and other outdoor resources for economic benefit. The Port of Bellingham submitted a letter, as well as other entities, in support of the marine tourism legislation. That Blue Ribbon Task Force came out with their recommendations in September of this year, and one of their priority action items was that marine tourism legislation. So we'll continue to make that case as the session moves forward, and hopefully that'll be reflected in the governor's budget when it's introduced. Aquatic invasive species control. This is environmental objective. Obviously, our freshwater resources and marine water resources are at risk to foreign species when they're introduced without their natural predators. Restore revenue sharing measures. That relates to the liquor tax and marijuana tax and getting some of those resources to the city and county to address some of the issues associated with those types of activities. And then also the Public Works Assistance Account. This is one. It's primarily for the city. However, they got a low-interest loan out of this account for the Cornwall Avenue landfill cleanup, for example. So relates to shared interests. Criminal justice and social services funding, that relates to drug treatment, low-income housing, those types of activities. And then rail safety is emergency response related to potential rail issues. So those are the shared legislative objectives between the port, city, and the county. The session begins on January 5th. It's a 105-day session. We expect that to go longer given the issues that face the state during this legislative session. If you vote to approve this shared legislative objectives, we'll plan on having a work study update sometime during the session to let you know where we are in this issues and other issues we might be pursuing, both independently from the Port of Bellingham's interests or through WPPA. And then that will tee up a visit for the Port Commission down to visit the legislators and additionally reinforce the importance of some of these issues. Yes?
I'm just curious, you put them all in a bag and somebody just draws one out. How does it work with the 7 items that are on here?
With the project managers over at the city and the county, and some of these are carryovers from last legislative sessions, and then we also work with our consultant, McBride Associates, and they help, let us know, how we want to craft the message, what issues are going to be key, and how we can position ourselves to get the support both of the 40th and 42nd electeds, and then also, other electeds throughout the state.
Okay. Thank you.
I attended the debate between two of the folks running for office that I can't say it was enjoyable, but one thing that came out of there that I was really pleased with was they both agreed that they would not raid that MODCA fund at all and hold their feet to the fire, or at least make sure our lobbyists hold their feet to the fire on that, because that's important.
Absolutely. And
They both agreed to it, and it was in a public meeting, so we need that money. It's important to us.
yeah, we've had strong support, in our legislative districts, and when the governor was up for a visit in July, we really emphasized the importance of those fundings and, really went beyond just the environmental benefits of doing the cleanup and what the economic benefits were associated with that environmental cleanup. And, I think that's a message that everybody can get behind. So we'll continue to make that.
The other question, how long have we shared this partnership? Is this the third year?
Yeah, so January 2013, we signed the interlocal agreement.
And you feel that works out pretty well with,
Absolutely, yeah. And especially given the challenges at the state level, having that representation and working cooperatively with the city and county and some of what you said is that the local people running for office are aware of some of those issues and supportive of our interests, and to the extent that we can make that as multiple jurisdictions, I think it adds credibility and loudness to our voice.
thank you.
Is that it, Mike?
Yep.
One issue I'd like to continue to make clear that's of interest to me is that we do this every year. We go visit our legislators in Olympia, and every year our lobbyists visit our legislators in Olympia, and they live here. I know them. I don't need to go to Olympia and lobby them. I'd like to make sure that our lobbyists are working very carefully to find those other folks that we should be targeting and discussing and having conversations with as well, because I don't know who they are, and I would rely on our lobbyists to find those people and let us know who they are so that we can target them, whether it's with a letter of support or against or something like that, and either a commission voice or just an individual commissioner's voice. I would like to see them provide that service for us, because we haven't done that in the past, and it's a bit of a pet peeve for me, because I know Doug. I've been to his office a lot, and I know where he lives, but I don't know which senator from Mukilteo or something that's holding something up that I wouldn't even know about if it wasn't for our lobbyists having information about that. So if I could just pass that on and see what we can do about that, I'd appreciate it.
Good idea.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and I think another forum is the WPPA, and I think they can also help identify,
much, yep.
Some target legislators to go and talk to.
Yeah, absolutely. So anything further, gentlemen?
No.
Nothing? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. That's a vote, Jim. We're taking a vote on that one.
Oh, we are?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, good deal. There's a lot of presentations today. Thank you, Mr. Hogan.
Sorry.
That's all right. Yeah, I heard some hatcheries giving away fish today.
Yeah, I don't do it.
Yeah, you just show up and they give you free fish.
That's disgusting.
All right, our final item then, Adam. First, Diane, thank you.
Authorize the executive director to execute a license with the city of Bellingham for an interim trail to connect Bellwether Way to the ASB Breakwater Trail and establish a 2015 open space capital project valued at $25,000.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. In December of 2013, the Port and the City of Bellingham entered into a interlocal for this facilities agreement, which you see here, just the first page of it. Within that agreement on Exhibit B.1, what is called for is, just a blow up there of that dashed box, is an interim access to the ASB Breakwater Trail. Essentially what we're doing is commencing the fulfillment of the requirements of the facilities agreement that we entered into with the city. And so in pursuant to that, we've met with the city several times. We've come up with a design for this trail. And then we've had, of course, legal counsel from both sides advise on what the wording of the agreement needs to be, the license, what that wording of the license needs to be, pardon me. And that's what's before you today, is authorizing our executive director to execute that license. If I could just quickly take you through, the trail begins up here next to the Coast Guard station. Currently, there's a short asphalt trail that goes essentially nowhere. It was built for future to be connected to, and that's what we're doing now with an interim. The trail swings around the mouth of the I&J waterway. The reason for this path is that we're avoiding the Department of Natural Resources property right here. Trail swings and parallels the waterway for nice views. It makes its way out to Hilton, where there's a small gravel, very simple parking lot. This is, by the way, a very simple trail, just simply 8 or 10 feet of 4 inches of crushed limestone. Very simple, very movable, very temporary. In the agreement, of course, is language that if we ever have other uses for this property, including cleaning it up or operational use or tenant use, that we can get that relocated at the city's expense. The trail moves along up here, then it goes up a grade. The city will build, gets us about 8 feet higher and up onto the Stortcraft parking lot there. Goes through our gate and then proceeds out the ASB trail to a stopping point here. Again, the reason we stop there is this is the edge of the Department of Natural Resources property once again, which at this point we don't believe our PMA with DNR allows for the use of a trail on their property. So that is the license. The city would maintain and operate the trail. They would construct the trail. We do have a little bit of work to do, which is why we asked for a $25,000 budget out of open space. Because this is a recreationally driven project, there's just a few things we need to do to secure our tenant right here at Hawley's Marina, as well as just a little bit of signage and out here and making our property as safe as possible. The commissioners have any questions about granting this license?
How excited is Bornstein's with this crossing of Hilton Avenue right there?
Do you want to comment, Cheryl? Or?
I think they're fine, and we've been working with Hilton Harbor Marina too, and we're working around the lease lines. So yeah, I think our tenants are fine.
There's a lot of truck traffic that pedestrians are going to be walking across right there. And they're going to park right next to that as well. That's the parking area if you're going to walk this trail?
That's correct. Well, that's one of them. Honestly, the trail is a continuation of the entire Squalicum Harbor Trail, so people enter it at a number of different places, but there is a very simple small lot there for people that want to start there.
On that whole trail, is there anywhere that would have the activity that they're going to have there at Bornstein's crossing it? If you follow that trail all the way around, there's nowhere where there's that kind of traffic, is there?
Well, the boat launch would be one area where they're contending with traffic.
I'd guess Bellwether Way is far busier than Hilton is.
Oh, okay.
By
That's
far.
right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Coho Way, Seaview, they all have a lot of traffic.
Yeah. So, Adam, the fence by Port of Bellingham as needed, and the future beach access, at what point is the city expecting that might happen?
No plans as yet. Here's the reality. The reality is that we have a trail. We're going to invite the public to be approximately 10 vertical feet across the riprap from Cow Beach, which is a very attractive little beach. So in anticipation that people will make their way across the riprap, even though there won't be a designated trail, we want to protect our tenant from just unnecessary exposure or people wandering through their site or anything else. And so that's the point of that fence. The city, it's inevitable that people are going to want to get to that beach being on that trail. So it's just designated that there will be future access at some point. However, it's not known what that would be yet.
And then just for the sake of everybody who needs to hear this, we have an agreement with Department of Natural Resources to drive vehicles on a roadway all the way around this facility, but we don't have an agreement that allows people to walk on that same roadway.
I believe that's correct. The vehicular access and maintenance of the roadway, maintenance of the breakwater, maintenance of the equipment out with the ASB would be what the nature of why we can drive out there. But my understanding is that using it for public access like a trail is not in the permitted use.
You need a big fence if you're going to drive it.
Yeah.
All right, just clarifying.
Yeah, no, it's a good question, but it comes down to maintenance of the facility versus public access to the facility.
Any expectation?
Oh, excuse me.
Is there an expectation they're going to be sticklers on this one?
They being DNR?
DNR?
That answers your question.
That was my question to you. Was
Okay,
I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to that question.
that's okay.
Yeah.
It's all right. We'll find out when we find out, right? Yeah,
Well, for the moment, we're staying off their property.
yeah.
Actually, it'll really be a nice trail out there. It'll be kind of windy and when the Bellingham Bay special's blowing, but other than that, on a nice summer night, that'll be a really nice trail.
You see how these inner harbor lines are just difficult to play with? Jim, you had something? No, that was it? All right, anything? No? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you very much, Adam. Anything from you gentlemen on new business? Nothing? Rob?
Tomorrow, Wednesday through Friday on the GP site, there's going to be a company called Hand Crank Films filming something out there. They've paid us a small fee to do so. A lot of activity, a lot of lights. A Delta military team, I guess, will be out there as well. So just in case you guys get some questions, it's, you know, it's just a movie being made or something.
Zombie apocalypse, right?
Yeah, something like that.
What else does anybody want to film here, right? I don't know. All right.
I just want to let you know in case people ask you.
All right, anybody else? Any comments? Anything at all? All right, thank you, everybody. Appreciate you all coming once again.